Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you all tonight. I'm Allison Stalcup-Beckwar. I'm the CEO at Lincoln Families. I want to thank everyone who's here for participating in our discussion, where we've had the opportunity to share the findings from our Pittsburg Needs and Strengths Assessment, and which we also hope to initiate a fruitful discussion with you all about next steps and opportunities to further engage the community. We want to acknowledge that many of you have participated and engaged in this process over the last few months. Thank you so much for both your time and talents. I also want to thank Amy Price and Allison McGee from the Zellerbach Foundation for their financial support and stellar partnership that led us to being able to launch this assessment process in the first place. For those of you who are less familiar with Lincoln, I want to provide, I promise, a brief overview of the services that we provide, our purpose and objectives of completing a community needs and strengths assessment here in Pittsburgh. So Lincoln is a 140-year-old organization that continues to evolve to meet the needs and strengths of all the communities that we serve. And we primarily do that through a guiding mission that is to disrupt cycles of poverty and trauma, empowering children, youth, and families to build strong futures. Our primary services are school and community-based mental health services, family resource centers, and literacy programs. And we provide a combination of these services throughout Alameda and Contra Costa counties with hubs in Pittsburgh, Antioch, Oakland, and Hayward. Our history specifically in Pittsburgh started in 1997 with our first school-based mental health contract at Highlands Elementary School, where we still are. And we have grown to provide school-based mental health services throughout Pittsburgh Unified, as well as at the middle schools in Antioch Unified. Within the school system, Lincoln is pretty well known. Within the community, less so, I would say. During our 25 plus years at providing services in the Pittsburgh schools, there have been many requests over the years for Lincoln to expand our services. Outside of the schools, we find that few people are even aware of the continuum of programming we provide within Alameda and Contra Costa counties. Several years ago, we went through a helpful process in West Oakland where a community needs and strengths assessment was completed, and we received crucial feedback at that time about the ways in which we could be of service to the community. This led to a deeper collaboration with other community service providers and families, particularly those with children aged 0 to 5. This also led to the development of a family resource center that we now run in West Oakland that provides community-based services and created a stronger connection to our other school-based programs in West Oakland. We know that each community is unique, so what we've learned in West Oakland does not necessarily apply in Pittsburgh. And we wanted to be very intentional in our process and making sure we're asking questions to identify the unique strengths, needs, and priorities of each community we serve. There was one part of the process, though, that in Pittsburgh is similar to West Oakland. And that is there was an abundance of great ideas and suggestions of what could be done. So much so that we are going to need your help to really figure out how to prioritize and make decisions so that we can truly deliver on any promises that we make to the community. So we're looking forward to your input today and in the next phase of our process about how we can play a supporting role in furthering community goals. I want to take a moment real quick to just thank Eugene Canson and Wes Barrett from our Lincoln team, and Allison Hamburg and Tato Ramawabi, our consultants, for facilitating the assessment process. A huge shout out to all of them as we're so excited about what they're going to share with you tonight that they discovered through their receiving your input and support. So just really want to thank them all for that work. So I'm going to pass things along to Eugene, who's our policy and partnerships manager at Lincoln, to share our findings. Eugene.
Yes, thank you, Allison, for those opening remarks. And again, thank you all. Appreciate you all for taking this time out of your busy schedules to be with us this evening, to listen, to engage, and participate in this discussion. And I did say listen, I did say participate and engage because we don't want this just to be us sharing out, information regarding the findings of this assessment. We also want to engage in a discussion and really ensure that community voices are incorporated in this process moving forward. And so happy that community is here. Looking forward to this time. So before we actually begin the presentation, I do want to make some shout outs. I want to shout out everyone who participated in the focus group discussions and the interviews and completed the community survey. Your insights and knowledge have been very appreciative and invaluable. And I know many of you are in this room. So thank you all for participating in this process. And with that, we'll go ahead and start the slides. Wes, could you please put up the slides? And I also want to shout out Wes and Marielle and two members on the development team for holding everything down in regards to Zoom and the slides. So thank you both for all of your work. So yes, we're here to share some information regarding the assessment of service needs, strengths, and opportunities for children and youth and families in Pittsburgh. So we go on to the next slide, Wes. And another shout out, giving out a lot of thanks today. I have to give a big shout out to our amazing consultant team, Tato Ramawabi, as well as Allison Hamburg, who have been very critical and invaluable in this work. They have been in every step of the process. The focus group discussions they've been a part of. They helped create the community-based survey. They helped create the assessment that you're all going to receive in the next few days. So again, thank you both, Tato and Allison. And Tato, unfortunately, is not able to be with us today, but Allison is here, and you'll actually be hearing from her momentarily as she shares some information regarding the findings. And so we could go ahead to the next slide. So why are we here tonight? I don't know, still even now, some of you may be thinking, why are we here? Why did we invite you all to spend about an hour and a half with us this evening to share this space? Well, in the early stages of this process, we stated that in order for us to do this right, we needed to engage the community in a thoughtful way every step of the way. And so we recognize how important transparency is, especially when you're dealing with working with communities, and which is what we're doing. And so we wanted to be transparent and open, and this is a part of that process. So we're taking this time to really share some of our approach, share our findings, share some opportunities as well as takeaways from this assessment. But importantly, to hear from you all, to hear your feedback, what resonates, what would you like to see moving forward, answer some questions that you may have, as well as talk about next steps. Let me go ahead to the next slide. So I want to speak a little bit to our approach and methods in this assessment. So alongside Allison and Tato and the team, we wanted to be mindful not to unduly burden communities that have historically been over-researched, right? And so with the understanding that oftentimes folks may come in and assess and research communities and pull data, and then they may leave and nothing may come of that. And oftentimes many of these communities, often Black and brown communities and other marginalized communities feel as though they've been taken advantage. And so we didn't want that to be the case. And so we wanted to, leverage the existing data that is out there and ensure that the assessment that we were looking to do is tailored to our purpose. And so we did look at 7 different assessments and reports that have taken place in Pittsburgh, as well as other areas in East Contra Costa County to ensure that. And I'll speak on a future slide about some of those reports. And then we also had some informant interviews, focus group discussions, as well as a community survey that I mentioned. And thankful for the hearing back from so many community members. Over 40 community members engaged in these focus group discussions and interviews. Over 100 folks completed the survey, a good mix of adults and youth. So very appreciative of the responses that we were able to receive. And then in regards to community representation, right? So survey respondents closely match the racial, ethnic, and makeup of Pittsburgh, which is what we were hoping to see to ensure that there is equity there. And we're pretty confident that findings represent the strong understandings of community priorities in Pittsburgh, but we do understand that further engagement is required. So this is not the whole picture. right? So we're sharing out some responses and findings from folks that we were able to engage in these discussions, but we weren't able to speak to everyone. And so this is just what we were able to see, but further engagement is definitely required, and we're looking forward to that as well. So we could go to the next slide. So I want to share a view of some of the other assessments that we looked at, right? And so here's, there's 7 of them. Here are some here. So the City of Pittsburgh Youth and Young Adults Service Master Plan that recently came out in Pittsburgh, the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice here in Contra Costa County. Many of you may be familiar, but they put out a great report as well, a needs report from ECA, so the East Contra Costa Community Alliance. They have a great report that they put out in 2020. My Brother's Keeper Initiative, Measure X, the Antioch Change Report, as well as the Kaiser Permanente report. So there's some good information here. I would recommend you all, if you haven't had a chance to look at these reports, to take some time and see what's in these reports as well. And in our report that we'll be sending out, we also provide some of the synthesis and summaries of these reports as well. But wanted to highlight that here. We go over to the next slide. And I want to share some information about our informational meetings, right? So our initial meetings that took place with several different community members. And these were really, really helpful for me, especially because when I joined, when we started this assessment, I had really just joined Lincoln, right? So I was still learning the landscape of Lincoln, as well as the landscape of Pittsburgh and the stakeholders and the community members. So I'm thankful for everyone on this list who were, took the time and had the willingness to have conversations with me as well as our team, just to provide some background information about Pittsburgh, right? Some background information about what some of these needs are, what exists here, who I should talk to. So just really thankful for everyone on this list. And I know some of you are on the call today. So we'll go to the next slide. Same thing with interviews and focus groups. We were able to have a focus group discussion with different stakeholders such as CBOs, community-based organizations, people who care, First Five, Civil Corps, who actually opened up a satellite site in Pittsburgh, which we're happy about. Had a good conversation with some folks at Pittsburgh Unified School District. Thank you to Jessica Rojas, our Director of School-Based Services here in Contra Costa, for bringing folks together and having such a fruitful conversation. Had a great opportunity to speak with some students at Pittsburgh High regarding some of the needs there. And also had some other interviews, right? So we were able to connect with Denisha Marsh, who I believe I saw her here today, who's with the Parental African American Achievement Collaborative Team, PAT. So thank you, and have some good conversations with some faith leaders and elders at Pittsburgh Seventh-day Adventist Church, as well as with council member Jelani Killings, as well as some folks with the Measure X Community Advisory Board. So just wanted to highlight some of these folks and share that information here. Next slide, please. So in regard to community representation, as you can see here for the adult surveys, you see on the left side, you have Pittsburgh residents in regards to race, ethnicity, and adult survey respondents. So it's pretty strong alignment there. And you see in gender, it was majority women who completed the survey. So that's something that we're looking at and learning from and saying, okay, how can we continue to engage the men in Pittsburgh? Because we do want to have that engagement as well. And most folks who completed the survey, the adult survey, were from Pittsburgh or Bay Point, then somewhere in Antioch as well. We go to the next slide. And then for the youth survey, as you can see here in regards to race and ethnicity for youth enrolled in Pittsburgh Unified versus those who completed the survey, it's pretty good alignment there. 64% were Hispanic and Latinx, 28% Black or African American, 15% white, 10% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and 9% Asian or Asian American. So pretty good alignment there. We go over to the next slide. So I want to now pass it off to Allison to share some information regarding some of the findings.
Great. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here with you this evening. So I'll be going through some of our key findings, which you'll have access to the full report, which goes into a lot more detail. So we'll be providing a summary here today. So first, starting off, this was called a needs and strengths assessment, right? We want to recognize that there are existing community resources in Pittsburgh, and our discussions really highlighted a number of existing community-based providers that support Pittsburgh residents in different service areas. And here's a partial list. And really this highlights that while oftentimes what we hear about Pittsburgh and East County, it's discussed as, you know, an area where there's a shortage of services. But there are numerous existing services and organizations, many of which have a deep history in the community. So we want to recognize that, and we have descriptions of those organizations in the report as well. Next slide, please. Across the different community input activities, like the interviews, focus groups, and surveys, stakeholders emphasized the importance of meeting youth and families' needs in the areas of mental health, employment, basic needs, after-school activities, and youth leadership and development. And these priorities align really closely with the results from those other recently completed needs assessments in Pittsburgh and East County. We also saw strong alignment between the priorities that were mentioned by youth and those mentioned by adults on the survey. And there was also similarities between the priorities that arose in the survey and those that came up in the focus groups and interviews. So all of these factors lead to the confidence that we have in the findings, and also, as Eugene mentioned, knowing that there's a need to just continue to engage folks, and that there were some folks, you know, whose voices were not heard as strongly, who Lincoln wants to continue to engage. Next slide, please. Mental health and employment support rose up among the top priorities for both youth and adults. We see here, this table shows the survey results. About 3/4 of youth respondents selected finding a job, learning job skills, and learning about career options. And almost half selected mental health counseling as top priorities. And among adults, a full 80% indicated mental health counseling as one of the top needs and priorities, and over half selected employment support. And in the focus groups and interviews, students and providers and community members agreed with these priorities and elaborated on the significant need for culturally and gender responsive mental health services. And students and school-based providers especially wanted to see more availability of school-based mental health services. And then in terms of employment, students and providers discussed wanting support with finding jobs and more exposure to different careers and vocational programs, including paid job training programs in different types of career fields. Some of the other areas that also rose to the top on the survey and were discussed in the interviews and focus groups include after-school activities and academic support. In focus groups, we heard discussion about needing after-school activities for children and youth of all ages, knowing that parents are oftentimes at work. And these include free programs beyond school-sponsored after-school programs, and programs that offer a variety of engaging services, including gym, sports, science and technology, arts, tutoring, and a space to do homework and study. Youth also highly prioritized financial literacy support. As we can see here, 55% on the survey said this was a top need, such as learning how to manage a budget or open a bank account. And then basic needs assistance, like help with rent and bills and food, was also high on the list of priorities and was a really common topic of discussion in the focus groups and interviews as well. Some other priorities that also came up in our discussions that's not shown on this slide also include health and wellness, including medical and dental services and sex education. Support for peer relationships, especially in light of social media and cyberbullying, and support for parents and caregivers to have conversations with their children about important issues like mental health, self-harm, cyber safety, and human trafficking. And across all of these discussions of needs, what's important to point out is that providers emphasize that youth and families often have multiple needs: social, emotional, medical, housing, and food, and that right now more than ever, there is expanded need due to the lasting impacts of COVID. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of what would support people to participate in programs, in addition to asking people what they thought their top priorities were in terms of needs that they see in the community, we also asked what would actually be necessary in order for people to be able to participate in these programs, right? So cost and location came up as key factors. We see here, based on the survey, that having services in places that are close to home or school, and at places that people are used to going would support participation. And then having services at low or no cost is also very critical. We also see that cultural responsiveness, as well as having multiple services available at one location, were factors that would support participation in services. And we can go to the next slide. In the interviews, focus groups, and the survey responses, we gained many more detailed insights as well about people's ability to participate in services and what makes people want to engage in services. And these findings also aligned closely with the other needs assessments. And because Lincoln provides mental health services and is known as a mental health service provider, the discussion elicited a lot more detail about some of these barriers and challenges to access with regard to mental health services in particular. So I'm going to provide just a brief summary of the findings in 7 key areas. And again, the report has more detail. The first is that providers and students emphasized that limited awareness, so not knowing about services, is actually one of the most significant barriers. There are services out there and people don't know about them. And a related challenge that was mentioned is that there can be lack of coordinated outreach and marketing. So people may be confused about what services are offered. They might not have correct information about eligibility, and just generally kind of fatigue about navigating the system of services and just figuring out how to get services. All of these can be challenges to people being able to receive services that they need. Second, many stakeholders talked about service capacity as a bigger issue than service gaps. So in other words, they observed that there are services to meet many of the community needs, but the services cannot serve the number of people who need that service. Then third, because of the high cost of living, families really need services that are free or very, very low cost. We heard that many families must choose between paying for basic needs and paying for supportive services, and can rarely afford to pay for services for multiple children or multiple family members. And then number 4, in terms of mental health services in particular, Medi-Cal-based eligibility creates barriers to receiving services. So for example, students shared, even those who are eligible for Medi-Cal, that the extensive paperwork and the time that it takes to qualify for school-based mental health services can lead some students to just wanting to give up on even pursuing it. And for students who do not have Medi-Cal, their options for affordable mental health services are incredibly limited. Fifth, cultural responsiveness. So ensuring that programs reflect the diverse backgrounds, experiences, and languages in Pittsburgh was a common topic of discussion. And in particular, we heard that there are not enough mental health therapists that are reflective of the culture and or the gender of youth and families who are seeking services. Number 6, because of limited transportation infrastructure, services that are in walking distance from home or school are most accessible for families and youth. All stakeholders also emphasize that services must be offered in the evening times to be accessible for working families. And then finally, number 7, providers explained that stigma around seeking help, particularly around mental health and food, affects both youth and adults. Fear of being judged by peers can prevent people from seeking services. And for families that are new to the US and or might be undocumented, there can be even greater hesitance to seek services, either because of being unfamiliar with navigating new systems or because of fear of immigration status. And we can go on to the next slide. So in summary, what supports access to services and encourages engagement in those services? We know that economic accessibility, geographic accessibility, accessible hours for working families, and awareness and navigation of services are key. We also heard from youth and providers that programs must be engaging and fun. They must use a culturally responsive approach, including having staff who reflect the backgrounds and lived experience of participants, and that focus on the rich assets of the youth and the Pittsburgh community. And then finally, programs must include youth and family voice in designing and implementing programs. So now I'll turn it back over to Eugene to go into some of the opportunities that arose through the assessment.
Thank you so much, Allison. So yeah, now we want to speak to some opportunities, and here on this slide, the capacity building and coordination of existing services. So the focus of increasing capacity rather than creating new programs and services was pretty consistent across community input activities. But that being said, community members stated that they would like to see more of a variety of services offered, whether existing or new programs, especially in terms of school programs and employment and job training programs. As well as the need for greater coordination and alignment in service delivery emerged strongly in this and other needs assessments. Service providers emphasize the importance of aligning services to prevent fragmentation and duplication of services, which could possibly be accomplished through a coordinated network to help ensure that we aren't working in our silos. So that's something that we've heard throughout the process as well, right? Is so how do we get out of our silos and help support other folks who are doing what they're doing well, right? So we may do this well, they may do this well. How do we work together and support in a coordinated way? So that's something that definitely came out of the discussions. And it's also important to keep in mind that cities are part of a larger ecosystem. And so what do we mean by that? So one thing that was shared with me as we started this process is that Pittsburgh, Bay Point, Antioch, our poorest communities, right? In the sense that it may be beneficial to maintain a regional impact and a regional mindset while still considering the very hyper local needs of the community. And so that's something that we've definitely tried to do in this process as well, is engage some folks in Pittsburgh, but also there are some folks in Antioch and Bay Point. And so something that we are being mindful of. We can go ahead to the next slide. And now looking at opportunities as it relates to a multi-service family resource center, right? So as Allison mentioned in her opening remarks, Lincoln operates and runs a family resource center in West Oakland. And so one of the initial questions that we had coming into this process was figuring out if a similar type of service or something that is something that the community in Pittsburgh would appreciate, and is it something that the community in Pittsburgh needs, right? And is something that they want. So this is a question that we posed to different folks in the focus groups and interviews, and that's where we learned really about some of the existing resources, right? So we learned about the First Five centers with First Five Contra Costa, the Family Resource Center with St. Vincent de Paul. So definitely don't want to duplicate those efforts, but also something that came out was a need or a want of a multi-service youth center or a multi-service family resource center that operates as a community village, right? So an example that was brought up is the Rise Center in Richmond, right? A community one-stop shop where multiple services are provided. And so that's something that came out as a need. And some of the suggestions that youth and families brought up was in regards to services that could be provided at a center like this would be academic and homework support, art classes, teen parents program, employment services, right? So mental health services, as well as services for LGBTQ plus youth. So this is definitely something that would require a certain level of partnership and collaboration. We may do some of these well, others may do some of these things well, but it is something that came out from the community and we wanted to highlight here. We go to the next slide. So back to, I guess, sticking with a multi-service center and some of the perceptions in the community regarding a center like this. So over half of adult survey respondents selected that one-stop location with many services in one place as a top factor that would help families participate in these services. And then also location and accessibility was a significant factor as well. So for students, services would need to be at school or in a walking distance from school or home. And for families, services would need to be close to home, which may entail having multiple satellite sites in the community. So again, just to highlight here that one-stop shop community village is something that was brought to light, as well as some location and accessibility with students and families. So we go ahead to the next slide. So opportunities to improve services for youth and families. And so these are some suggestions that youth and families provided, and there are several others in the report as well. So these are a bit focused on, on Lincoln, so understanding what we can provide in the community. So one of them being is co-locating mental health services. So, providing mental health services at another space or at another organization in the community that may not provide those services. But there's definitely a need, right? So that would require a certain level of collaboration and participation. That's something that came up. Expanding school-based mental health services. So whether that's in addition to offering new services or expanding the number of students who can participate in the services that we provide in the schools is something that came up as well. And I know that's something that we're looking at Lincoln as well. Then also integrating parent and caregiver supports into schools, right? So for example, a parent or a caregiver, having a parent or a caregiver room at a high school or a school with a liaison that could provide services and supports and resources there at the school. And so something like a school-based FRC, right, which is something that Lincoln operates in East Oakland, a school-based FRC. So this is something that came out from the community as well. Also creating peer support services in high schools. So understanding that, many young folk and youth are more comfortable engaging with their peers than maybe a mental health professional. So seeing how we could support efforts to move forward peer supports in the high schools. And also partnering with faith-based organizations and places of worship. One thing that we know is that many of these faith leaders are embedded in the community. And so there's a connection there. And many of these faith-based organizations want to engage even more so in the community. And they're looking to work with different CBOs to provide those resources. So whether it's providing mental health supports at a church or at the site, or providing other services, that level of engagement with places of worship and faith leaders and faith-based organizations is something that was brought forward to us in the community, and it's something that is important as well. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So youth and family-centered voices. And so, the community really emphasized that the approach to any service in the community must see, respect, and include youth and families in the process. So that's how we're moving forward, and we definitely want to center youth and families. And so I have some quotes here from some students as well as some school-based providers that really shares this point. So if you see at the top right, a student said the most important thing is to get everyone's opinions and not just the ones that talk more, right? And if you see below that, a school-based provider stated that our kids don't need to be saved. It's more about embracing our children and guiding them through hardships. Not so much changing who they are, but getting to understand them in their skin. And so these were a part of some of the fruitful conversations that we had with school-based providers, as well as students at Pitt High. So definitely centering youth and families is something that we are going to focus on moving forward in this process. It's definitely highlighted over the past few months. Next slide, please. So I could stop talking, I'm gonna get through some of these takeaways. And one of the things that we want to highlight, or something that was significant in our finding, was that assessment aligned with many of the other findings from the other recently completed needs assessments, right? And so there were, some of that being the priority needs around mental health, employment, economic mobility, after school programs, academic support, and basic needs. These are things that were definitely highlighted in our work, and some of that even in some of the other work that have taken place, but they definitely stood out. And also positive community resources exist in Pittsburgh, and so many of those resources are here in this room now. But more supports are definitely needed to adequately serve the number of people who have unmet and economic and mental health needs in Pittsburgh and in East Contra Costa County. And so knowing that these resources exist, how do we work together? But also knowing that there's more work to be done. And we can go to the next slide, and I think we have some more takeaways. Yes. So also limited awareness of services is a significant barrier that points to a need. for a more coordinated approach among service providers. One thing that I recall over the past few months is me and Jessica Rojas went over and spoke with some youth commissioners of the city of Pittsburgh, and was sharing some information about our HOPE program and school services, as well as this assessment. And one thing that pretty much all of the commissioners said was that they wanted to know more about Lincoln and know more about the services that we provide, and be more aware, right? So, youth definitely want that awareness. And so something that we're definitely working on in regards to seeing how we can get the word out there in regards to the services that we do provide right now. Then also, before creating new programs and services, Lincoln must consider strategic partnerships in an effort to augment the capacity of existing community-based services. So as I mentioned, we have a ton of resources that are in this room. There's a ton of folks who do great work in Pittsburgh. So seeing how we can best support each other. It doesn't mean that we're not going to work to implement new services, right, that may be needed, but it just means that we really need to look and see, okay, how can we best support what's working right now, and how can we work in a coordinated effort with our partners and folks who are doing the work on the ground. So we go ahead to the next slide. So with that being said, we do want to, yes.
Eugene, before we move there, I just want to lift up a question that Solomon had in the chat, and see if you or Allison can take that on.
Thank you,
so
Kirsten.
He's asking what age group constitutes the adults or the elderly, those over 65 included in the adult category. What's the percentage breakdown by age? Since that would be an interesting data point.
Thank you. And Allison, do you know, I believe 65 and older was included. Don't know if you have any other.
For the survey, is the question regarding the survey? So for this survey, we actually did not ask for an age breakdown. We only separated the survey into youth and adults. Primarily, we asked on the adult survey whether the respondent identified as a parent or caregiver of a young person, but that was as far as we went in terms of an age breakdown on this particular survey.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And I hope that answers your question, Solomon. And there should be more in the report as well. So what the plan is, we do want to hear from you all and hear more questions like this. So we have 4 different breakout groups that we plan to put you all in. There will be 4 different facilitators. Each facilitator will be someone from Lincoln, and we will go over these guiding questions, right? So which of these findings resonate the most? What initial thoughts do you have to share? As well as what specific service needs and priorities stand out? What strengths and or needs are missing? And then the third question being, how would you recommend Lincoln engage the community moving forward? So this is really what we have here today, is that first phase, right, of coming together and putting together an assessment, which required us to engage with you all. But now that next phase of work over the next few months is really looking at, okay, what does implementation look like? What services do we want to implement? What are needed? And then a part of that, we're going to work on our side with Lincoln to figure out what we could do, but also we want to engage the community along the way. So how would that engagement look like? Or would you recommend it look like? So we have like a youth caregiver advisory council, as well as having community discussions with different groups throughout the community as we work over the next few months to figure out what that implementation should look like. So we'd love to hear from you all. And again, we can discuss more in the breakout groups. So Marielle, if you don't mind, well, you know what? Let's do this. So initially we're gonna go straight into breakout groups, then come back. But I wanna open it up just a few minutes to hear from 1 or 2 of you, maybe 3 of you, just to share your initial thoughts regarding some of the findings that were shared today. And then we could get in and delve deeper into the breakout group questions. But want to open it up to anyone who wants to share their initial thoughts with the whole group right now. you could raise your hand, you could just speak, and if no one wants to, then we could go into breakout.
I've got a question. Thanks, Eugene. Sometimes it helps me to kind of visualize things. If we talk about the actual physical location of where the Family Resource Center is going to be located, is it going to be in a school, in a new building? What's the address? That, if you have any sort of sense of that you could tell us about, that might be something to help with the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So we have it narrowed down on a physical location, whether it be brick and mortar, or we're, really, or whether we're expanding services. Those are discussions that we're really going to have over the next few months, and with continued engagement with the community. So we'll keep you updated there, but we haven't really delved into that piece yet. I don't know if Allison or Kirsten, you want to share some thoughts regarding what that may look like.
Do you mean me, Allison? We've
I mean, you, Allison.
Okay, I thought that's what you meant, but just, yeah, I mean, I think, hi, Ken. I think we really are just in a process of digesting the information and wanting to get feedback. So it really could look all sorts of different ways. Lincoln has a few frameworks we know, where we've done a community-based FRC. We've done a school co-located FRC. We've been a supporting player in another agency's location and brought in support. So we're really open to what that could look like. So yeah, excited to see what comes out of the breakout groups.
Yeah, and I can just jump in quickly too, because from the assessment, when we asked people about a potential resource center, and Eugene went over those findings a little bit, one of the things that came out was because of just the geography and the lack of, real transportation, that just having one space would not actually meet the needs, that there would need to be multiple locations throughout the community that would be, basically in walking distance for families. And so that was something that came out of the discussion, and, would be open to further discussion again about what this might look like.
I'll go next. Thank you, Eugene and Allison, for sharing your findings from the assessment. That was really helpful and an eye opener. And I applaud you for being very engaging in your process of reaching out to various segments and stakeholders in the community. I'm curious about one thing, and if you could, one of you could sort of elaborate further on what your thinking is in terms of strategic partnerships. I know that's something that you are aspiring to do, but what does that mean, and how would you define that, and how would you want to go about developing strategic partnerships with various community-based organizations, or one organization for that matter? That might not make much of a difference, but I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Solomon, and again, thank you as well for being a part of this process and helping me early on in this process. So in regards to strategic, partnerships, is something that we've really been working on doing. Is one, building partnerships that we may not have already had, and growing partnerships that we have had in Pittsburgh, and seeing how we can best support each other, right? And so knowing that we do well in regards to mental health services, how can we work with other organizations that are serving the same community, right? So there are some on this call, several that I listed as well, that serve the same community. We serve a lot of same folks in Pittsburgh that many other CBOs serve. And so seeing how we can come together and say, okay, how can we support? What that exactly looks like, I think we'll need to figure that out over the next few months. But getting on that same page first is something that I would say. And Allison, Beckwar, or Kirsten, feel free to jump in and add any thoughts that you may have as well regarding that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, to Eugene's point, we're really trying to wrap our heads around how can we be of service, and sometimes us being of service is not actually providing a new program or a different kind of program. It could be, how do we leverage some of the connections we already have, some of the relationships we already have. So that I could see as being a strategic partnership. You know, we have a relationship with Self-Help Credit Union, and I'm sitting here hearing, you know, the feedback about finance, financial literacy. Is that something where we could be, you know, helping Self-Help connect with more of the youth in Pittsburgh? That's literally just something that popped in looking at the data tonight. So I think it's really going to, you know, it is a process that's got to be done together, because we need to constantly be attuning to what you all are telling us and what the youth and families are telling us is where and how we're most of service. So.
Are there any others? Any folks want to share some thoughts? If not, thank you for the questions that were provided, and we could go ahead and jump into these breakout rooms. And Marielle, I think 15 minutes would be fine. And we'll do that and then see you all back on the other side. All right, I think we're all back. See, we still have the same amount of participants, so I don't think many folks jumped off. But so glad you all are still here, and I hope you had a fruitful conversation in your groups. So I do want to take some time before we close out just to give an opportunity for some of the folks in the groups to share kind of some of the highlights or share what they shared in their groups for the whole group. So I don't know if, let's say, Kirsten, if you want to share, or if anybody in your group wants to share anything that came out.
I will open it up to my group to see if there's anything that came out that was of interest. I think I will just say before I pass it on to another breakout group that obviously lots of interest about what's next, how that can look, how we can build the capacity of smaller nonprofits to deliver services in collaboration with us, transportation being a key issue, and infrastructure not as robust as you might see in inner city of urban areas of Alameda County, for example. And then just talking about the merits of a single hub or center versus maybe decentralizing that and pushing out services and having a remote or mobile type family resource center that goes around to different places in the community in collaboration with partners to deliver services. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Kirsten. Anybody else on the line want to share?
I can share some of the things that we talked around just the validation of like what, you know, has also been heard and the need for mental health. But also one of the things that we talked about was this reimagining what community mental health looks like. And how, you know, maybe we can have parent cafes where parents are actually helping run groups and things like that. So just kind of opening up to what that could look like. And obviously really leaning into our kids and our families and what the needs are, and how do we foster more connections between organizations so that we can become a one-stop, so they're not having to try to travel right to so many places, because transportation is a huge issue in our community.
Absolutely. You know, something that came out of our discussion was the barriers of accessibility as well as awareness was definitely highlighted. Then also something that was a good point is the need to let folks and community organizations sit with this report and digest this report and have some time to see, okay, how can we best support in this effort? Because I will say it is a very, once you all get the report, you'll see it's a very thorough and detailed report. And so, even myself, I'm still looking it over and understanding some things. And so that's, we want to provide that time for folks to digest it and then follow up with the community in the future to see, okay, how can we best support each other? So we definitely want to provide that opportunity and let that be known. Anything else other folks want to share? I know Wes, you had a group. Any highlights out of your group?
Yeah, my group pretty much touched on what y'all touched on, and they were just saying it's about like expanding capacity, right? Because there's always a need, and there's always like room to help all the kids that need help and families like that. But it's just like, space and having more staff. That's very important. And everyone touched on transportation, that being important as well. And also just, really like collaborating together and sharing resources. So there's not enough confusion about where resources are or if there's enough resources. There could be a one-stop shop we talked about as well, an FRC. So we talked about everything that y'all touched on as well. And
Yeah,
just brought up funding.
Yeah, funding, of course. But I also, if I can shout out Civicor, Joseph and Tessa, like I thought it was interesting how what they were noting was that the need for job force stuff is out there and they're providing services, so that there really is the need to make sure that the existing services that are there are getting connected to the young people who need those services, because there are some services there that maybe are being underutilized.
True.
Absolutely. And I see Jab on the line. Thank you for being here, representing Civicor. Good to see you. Anything else before we go into, I guess, some next steps, closing remarks?
One thing I mentioned, Eugene, since you brought me up, now I have to start talking. I brought this up in our breakout room in terms of asking the youth. I mean, is there, the high priority need from the young folks about finding a job and career pathways and information about that? Did it appear that the participants in the survey would agree to participate in a follow-up or give suggestions about what would work for them in terms of finding out things about careers and how to, apply for a job, get the job skills and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there definitely seemed to be a need and a want to understand what their options are and opportunities are in regards to economic mobility and careers and jobs with the youth in the community. And so, glad that you all are out there doing the work that you're doing. So it's definitely an opportunity to connect folks, right, and establish those type of strategic partnerships. So absolutely. Anything else? So in regards to, I guess, some of the next steps we do plan on, so all of you here will be receiving the full report shortly. We'll be sending that out. And as I mentioned, so this was phase one, creating the report with the support and help from Allison and Tato and the team. And then now we're going to be going into phase two, which is that further engagement of letting that report digest, but also looking at it and say, okay, how can we move forward in regards to program implementation? What do these strategic partnerships look like? What should they look like? And giving you all an opportunity to say, okay, this is how we want to help. This is how we can help. So, you'll definitely be hearing more from me and the team at Lincoln over the next few months as we continue to move forward. But in terms of right now, be on the lookout for this report soon, so you can have an opportunity to really digest the detailed and thorough information that's in there. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time, an hour and 15 minutes on a Wednesday. Man, that's really we really appreciate that. I know there's so much going on. So thank you all for sharing this space, and looking forward to continuing the engagement with all of you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Great
Have a
job.
good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.